Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 24th of July 2023. Don't forget, I'll be splitting this into two. Please be sure to check out the second part because the first part always gets restricted. So let's look at the general staff figures, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Of course, we have 660 liquidated personnel, so casualties of war here. There's still some debate as to whether that is definitely perished Russian soldiers or whether it includes seriously wounded. But 660 nonetheless is obviously a difficult number for the Russians, not the highest it has been. We've been over 1,000 at certain points during the war, but it's still pretty significant. Kind of where it's been for the last 3 days or so. 11 tanks and 13 APVs is a slight uptick. That's quite some heavy losses there. 17 artillery systems. Again, the Ukrainians targeting the Russian artillery pieces to try and degrade their defensive capabilities. It's not the highest we've seen, but it's still the mid-teens and above, which is on a daily consistent basis is a real headache for the Russians. One anti-aircraft warfare system, 5 drones and 9 cruise missiles. That's not from last night, the night before. 10 vehicles and fuel tanks and 2 pieces of special equipment. So fairly average numbers for some of those categories and fairly problematic in others. Let's see what other evidence we can bring to bear here. I've come across a thread that is just a thread of all the Lancet hits on Ukrainian pieces of kit. And actually, we mustn't forget that there are some significant losses for the Ukrainians still in terms of Lancet drones. Lancets are these K drones, loitering munitions that do substantial damage, or at least can do. To be honest, some of the footage is referring or showing equipment that may not be seriously damaged because the Lancets are quite variable. Depends where they hit, depends what munition the Lancet has as to what damage is or isn't done. But as you can see here, there are some fairly high value bits of kit amongst some of these hits. So yeah, some normal sort of IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, and then the odd self-propelled gun here, which is a slightly higher value. Then this is one of the highest value ones. This is a NASAMS, well, it claims it's a NASAMS air defense system element getting blown up, but it's not actually. It's an ASPEED, Skyguard ASPEED SAM system. It goes on to correct, which is, yeah, high value. So we'll look at that in a second. So on and so forth. There's just the Lancers are still used on a consistent basis. Here we have one against a Leopard tank, and we'll check this one out to see if it does the damage because Leopard is obviously pretty high value target. Quite often with the Lancets drone footage, if it doesn't have a third party, this does. This has another drone viewing it, but sometimes it cuts out without knowing there's lasting damage. So there it'll be nice if we'd seen that for another 30 seconds. That doesn't look like there's much damage. It looks like it actually hits the barrel. But point is that yeah, Lancers are still an issue. This thread gives you a whole host of hits on a daily basis. That they're 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours. So 17 hours, 5, 17, 6, so, and 20 hours, 7, 8. So 8 hits over the last 24 hours. Now, did they all take place in the last 24 hours? I don't know. It's just to let you know that Lancers are still an issue. In fact, here's a Ukrainian 9A330 TLAR of the Tor short-range air defense system. So again, it's another one of these parts of the air defense system that is being extinguished following a Russian strike, probably a Lancet loitering munition. Whether there's any lasting damage to that, it's unlikely, but it might need a little bit of TLC to get it back up and running. Now, when we look at Jacob Yanovsky here. He's part of the Oryx team, getting the visually confirmed uh, data and poring over those bits of footage. Actually, this is one of the rare days when Ukraine has suffered more losses than the Russians. I don't know whether it's for what reason that might be. We've got 18 Russian losses here, 7 BMP1s and 4 BMP3s. People commenting below on, wow, they are just absolutely churning through their BMP stockpiles there. Those are infantry fighting vehicles. The Ukrainians have 24, so that's 18 Russian losses to 24 Ukrainian ones, and there's a lot of tanks on there. It's all about building up a picture. Is this reflective of a greater offensive, greater number of offensive maneuvers over the last sort of 48 hours? I don't know. There's at least 8 tanks there, is there? Yep, there's 8 tanks. A couple of Leopards on there that are damaged. They are probably the ones being sent back to be repaired. I don't know. And another damaged T-64. And otherwise, they're either captured or destroyed. And then some 8 BMPs there as well. So they've lost a number of BMPs, 5 Bradleys. And then that Skyguard Aspid control station being destroyed, that Lancet was responsible for. And actually, Ukraine Weapons Tracker shows this themselves because it is such an important bit of kit. A Ukrainian battery control post of the Skyguard Aspid air defense system was destroyed by Lancet loitering munition near Muzikivka in the Kherson Oblast. The system was originally transferred by Italy and not by Spain, as was widely claimed earlier today. So this is as I say, a shame for the Ukrainians here. And they've listed it as destroyed. So this is the Lancet hitting at the top of it. And the primary explosion there is going to be the munition, but it's whether it does, cooks off any ammunition. That's not going to have ammunition on board because it's part of the system, but it is high value. And there's going to be stuff that electronics that gets fundamentally ruined there. But anyway, the claim is that is destroyed. For those who wonder, the SAM system was ID'd as ex-Italian as we were going by the launcher variant, which we didn't manage to find in service with the Spanish army. If you're familiar with the subject and we're wrong, we're glad to be corrected. Good old Ukraine Weapons Tracker does a really good job of trying to ID a whole bunch of equipment sort of in line with what Oryx does there. Fighters of the National Guard told how they destroyed 3 T-90 tanks in the Liman direction during a failed Russian attack. Of course, this is just claims by a soldier there with a little bit of video footage, but not, I can't verify that 100%, but it seems pretty legit. They've at least got some video footage to back up the claims there. 3 T-90 tanks in one attack is a big loss for the Russians. And then slightly different topic here. Deterioration of relations in the Russian armed forces is sharper than ever. Purges in the Russian army have become a new shock for the military elite of Russia. This was reported by the British Defence Ministry on Twitter. In total, according to the British MOD, 15 officers have been dismissed in Russia. You've got Ivan Popov there. You've got Surovikin, who's just sort of resting. You've got Seleverstov, who's reported as being sacked. These are quite high-ranking, Popov and Seleverstov, quite well-regarded commanders, and at least 15 senior officers reported as suspended due to disloyalty. So there are issues within the Russian MOD ranks that is a problem for their cohesion and for their activities. But we'll come to talk about what's going on in the front line later. Right, now let's go on to strikes, and there's quite a lot to talk about here. Let's just go back a couple of days first, though. Thomas Tyner says 19th of July strike on Stary Krim ammo depot. So that's the one that cooked off for ages. One of the ones that cooked off for ages. That was in Crimea, and it caused an evacuation of the area. It was on a training base. There's a lot of ammo, said to be the biggest ammo storage certainly on Crimea. I don't know whether it was just in total for the Russians. I mean, there's some various claims about that. Storm Shadow was used against that target, but reportedly the first time that Storm Shadow was used uh, in Crimea. And 22nd of July, just 3 days later, there was a strike on Oktyabrskoye base, also Storm Shadow. The UK allowed their use against Crimea after Russia hit Odessa. I'm not sure about this claim. So what Thomas Tyner is saying, and I was promised more of this to come. He's saying that now you're going to see Storm Shadows be used on Crimea where you didn't before because UK is now given the permission. I'm pretty sure UK said Crimea was fully on the cards. There's been no issue with striking Crimea, and I'm sure they've said that fairly explicitly. But there is now an uptick in use of Storm Shadows being used there, and there was a strike today or last night, but I think it was more drones that were used against Crimea last night, and we'll come to that in a wee while. So Russia is preparing for strikes on Ukrainian energy facilities. Again, this is according to the GUR. They've started such work. They carry out additional exploration. They use space reconnaissance in order to establish the state of our energy. So that could be a worry going forward. They could restart that campaign against the energy infrastructure that they were doing during the autumn last year going into winter. President's office has said the Russian missile attack against Odessa over the last few days has damaged 25 historical buildings. There's lots of evidence to suggest no, they weren't attacking the manufacturing facilities of unmanned sea drones. That's just complete nonsense. Now, I find these sort of statements very, very, very interesting and possibly reflective of a larger move within Ukraine. Mayor of Odessa, Tryukhanov, who was once notoriously pro-Russian and an alleged Russian dual citizen, speaks to Russia. He says, quote, "If you only knew how much Odessa hates you, the strength of your defenders multiplied by the anger and pain of ordinary people, sorry, the strength of our defenders multiplied by the anger and pain of ordinary people will be your death sentence." And I wonder how many people in Ukraine that would otherwise have been sympathetic to Russia are now no longer sympathetic to Russia. I wonder whether the whole war effort has been a shot in the foot in so many ways for Russia, not least the complete, you know, degradation of their armed forces or their army, particularly, but also the very people that they were wanting on their side, in many cases, particularly outside of say Donbass and Crimea, they have alienated and they've caused to hate them. And here you've got an important figure, the mayor of Odessa, really turning on the Russians for what they have done there. Now, I talked to you about how USAID had procured a whole number of massive hoppers to get grain by rail to Europe and beyond, therefore, to ports elsewhere from Ismail. Now, Ismail is just south of Odessa, next to the Romanian border, I believe. And talking about that yesterday and what happened last night, that's the target that the Russians hit. Explosions are heard in Ismail. According to subscribers, we are waiting official information. Well, that has come out. So Russia bombed Ukrainian ports at the Danube, close to the border of Romania, to stop grain exports via the river. Not just the river, that would be river and rail. But yes, it's also the Danube River is also one of the main ways that Ukraine is now getting grain exported. So they're unable to do it by the Black Sea, so they do it by rail and do it up the river. And of course, it's less efficient than doing it by sea. The capacity of those boats is not nearly as much, but this is really significant. And this is again, I mean, what do the Russians have to say about this? Are they hitting military targets? No. Are they hitting grain export targets? Yes. Who is affected by that? The rest of the world. They are hiding behind excuses that don't, their excuses for Odessa were just demonstrably wrong. what do they have to say about this? About hitting these grain exports um, facilities? It's just yeah, no, I don't have much time for Russia at the moment, unsurprisingly. Now, Ukraine said they were going to retaliate, and I think this is possibly part of their retaliation here. Moscow was attacked by drones a day after Russia attacked the Ukrainian city of Odessa with missiles. Ukraine denies attacking the Russian capital, so of course it's impossible to say who might be behind this morning's attack. There's still this talk about, well, can these drones get all the way from Ukraine to Moscow? You know, is that realistic, or are these released within Russia by sympathetic entities? And the answer is I don't know. There has been talk that actually they are doing a lot of work within Russia to enable this kind of activity to take place. I don't know, but drones have flown at Moscow and have hit. This is a military establishment. The impact of the GRU Cyber Directorate building on 20 Komsomolsky Prospect in Moscow after an alleged drone attack. So that is the big news there. In fact, there's more to say on that. I think I've got it out of order. Yep, here we go. So Moscow was attacked overnight by several drones and inflicted severe damage. The Russian Ministry of Defense calls it an act of international terrorism. Of course, they called that an act of international terrorism, but hitting grain exports in Ismail is just like, yeah, that's fine, right? And smashing the cathedral in Odessa and 25 historic buildings, that's not international terrorism. Okay, just wondering. Asking for a friend. Also, building connected to the Central Military Band of the Ministry of Defense of Russia was reportedly hit by drones. Mikhail Fedorov, Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, confirmed the attacks on Moscow and Crimea, and we'll come to that in a second. Drones attacked the Russian capital and Crimea tonight. Electronic warfare and air defense are less and less able to protect the skies of the occupiers, so that it doesn't happen there, but there would be more of it. So that is kind of ominous for the Russians. These don't look like huge. These are, I think, Beaver drones. They aren't huge drones. They're not going to cause massive amounts of damage, but they will cause a bit of panic amongst Muscovites, I'm sure, as they are taking footage, mobile phone footage of these, not only the ramifications of these attacks, but actually the drones themselves, as you can see there. I'll play that again. So these are these Beaver drones. You can tell them because they've got quite interesting setup there with the wings almost at the rear. Yeah, so that has happened in Moscow overnight. I don't think it's a huge amount of damage. It looks like quite a bit of damage to that building. But yeah, not a huge amount of damage. It is, though, significant that they can get into Moscow, and that's kind of the point there. Now, also, Crimea's has been hit overnight. Crimean public just counted up to a dozen unknown drones over Sevastopol. That was last night. And then today, in the sky over Crimea, 11 enemy drones were shot down by air defense forces and suppressed by electronic warfare, says the governor of Crimea. However, railway traffic and the highway to Sevastopol are closed, and there was a hit on an ammunition depot in the area of Jankoy. That's a logistics hub and air base in the north of Crimea. It's got a substantial explosion there that is causing quite a bit of consternation to the locals. Here we say Aksyonov announced that the evacuation of settlements within a radius of 5 kilometers from the burning ammunition depot in Jankoy. Russian MOD defense, Russian MOD logic. Crimea was attacked by 17 drones. 14 were suppressed by electronic warfare and downed, and 3 were destroyed. And the ammunition depot was struck by what? The wind? So, of course, somebody's not telling the truth there. But I guess that's, part of the course after these kinds of strikes. So, yeah, Ukraine are trying to hit back. Whether that's remotely comparable, though, to the damage to Ismail and to Odessa over the last nights or so. I don't know. What's I think more effective for Ukraine is absolutely hammering those logistics, and that hit on Jankoy will have some effect, I'm sure, going forward. Here, now moving on to other bits and pieces, the Kukovka Reservoir now serves a new purpose. Residents have planted potatoes. I guess the issue here is still, where do you get the water from? I mean, yes, I suppose the river is still flowing, isn't it? Just behind there, so that's where you get the water from. But yeah, might as well get some crops going and make use of this nice flat riverbed or reservoir bed, as was, that probably has fairly fertile land just at the moment, being used to grow potatoes. Moving on, breaking Ukraine takes down a massive pro Russian bot farm. Now, this is not uncommon. These things happen quite often, these raids on bot farms. This time it's about 150,000 SIM cards. So that's 150,000 fake accounts that are doing things for Russia. The bots were used to push Russian propaganda on social media, justifying the Russian war in Ukraine. It's not necessarily people making comments. You can't do that with bots. You need trolls to do that. So in my threads, we have a number of Russian trolls, and you know who they are. They know who they are. But aside from that, and I did a whole segment on trolls and bots. If you remember, you have bots that are doing automated things like liking comments and retweeting tweets and all stuff like that. That is more the automated stuff, and that helps to push the narrative. It gets certain messages amplified. It gets the algorithms ticking over, and yeah, pushing that Russian propaganda on social media. If we just look at the footage here from a TikTok video, Ukraine just took down a massive Russian bot farm, they say here. And you can see, just look at all of these. It's just incredible. Ukrainian police say they've taken down a huge bot farm with more than 100 operators allegedly spreading fake news about the invasion and sharing Russian propaganda. So you can see them all stacked. After conducting 21 searches, the country's cyber and national police seized computer equipment, mobile phones, and more than 250 GSM gateways and about 150,000 SIM cards. So it's just simulating profiles and then pumping out likes and retweets and all sorts of stuff to support the Russian narrative. Just on another point, because I haven't mentioned me old mucker Elon for some time. Just to let you know that Twitter is being rebranded. It will not be Twitter anymore. It's going to be called X.com. I think he tried to do that with PayPal and then got ousted by Peter Thiel. He tried to turn PayPal into X.com. Well, anyway, he's now doing that with Twitter. So instead of, I don't know, tweeting stuff, we'll be exiting stuff, exiting. I don't know. Good Lord of all Zoles, I might actually leave Twitter now, says Phillips O'Brien, or even pay $8 a month to go back to the way it was. So yeah, it's going to be rebranded. It's going to apparently be like banking centered. Yeah, whatever. But I hope that doesn't affect open source intelligence community and information that is kind of based on Twitter, because I and many others use Twitter as an information aggregator, for which it is very useful, and it still remains very useful and a very good platform for that. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll be back with you shortly in part 2 of my news update.